The Gender and Trade Coalition is a feminist alliance for trade justice with over 300 organizational members globally, an elected steering committee of 13 feminist organizations and allies, and we fight the neoliberal trade agenda. Trade is a feminist issue because it impacts every aspect of women's lives, and despite dominant neoliberal narratives that because trade is inherently beneficial to everyone, then obviously it's beneficial to women. In fact, often it's detrimental to women, and it's a feminist issue because it's up to us to shine a light on that and to fight for better policies and better realities.
Trade deals with everything that is about life. It's about living. It's about food, water, healthcare, employment. Everything that men, women, and children need is part of the trade. And trade currently is a big part of the earnings of developing countries. So it's definitely an issue that women and feminists and gender advocates must be concerned with. And the rules governing trade governs our day-to-day life, what we eat, how we sleep, how we live. So it's definitely a feminist issue. And we could talk about what feminism is, but it's really about having self-determination, having control, and also dealing with the powers that affects all of our daily life. And trade policies do that. So it's definitely a feminist issue.
Trade is a feminist issue because trade negotiations are forums where instead of protecting women's economic rights and interests, they are instead put up for sale to be captured by corporations and private interests. It's important to resist these private captures of women's time, labor, and energies, which are seen as disposable for capital, which prioritizes profit over people and the planet.
Why is trade a feminist issue? Firstly, it's because everything is a feminist issue. But secondly, because a lot of the current trade system and regimes are basically newer version of colonialism or forms of neocolonialism. And colonialism has and always been a feminist issue.
Trade is a feminist issue because around the world, a lot of women have limited access to things like education, technology, land, resources, which are all critical components to be able to benefit from trade opportunities. When women don't have access to this and trade policies are not able to address this, then trade policies are not gender inclusive.
Women are half the population of this world, so I think every issue is actually a feminist issue. Trade, as we know, trade policy and particularly the trade agreements, that we are signing at the multilateral level in the WTO or under the bilateral or regional trade agreements, or these very, very problematic investment treaties have such expansive impacts and as well as intensive impacts. Actually, they are really expanding both in coverage of new areas but also going deeper and deeper into existing areas. So they are affecting every aspect of our lives, and therefore it's not a surprise that they are impacting women's lives in critical ways, whether it's as women's food security or women's work in agriculture or in traditional sectors like fisheries, women's use of natural resources, their access to public services, also how now new issues like digital sector where women are engaged as workers or they could benefit from the use or access to such digital technology, and all these are now being shaped by trade agreements.
Trade governance is affecting how the economic system regulate on the basis daily life, especially for women, but they actually not giving any space for women to doing the intervention or at least picking up what are they interested on.
Trade is a feminist issue because it has an impact on women, different indigenous community as well. So when a government goes into an agreement, trade agreement, they kind of change national laws and policies, and that has an impact and trickle-down effect on community women. When they go on an agreement, usually there is a change in labor rights, and that also has a huge impact on women's rights in overall. I think the value of gender and trade coalition is it's a global movement, and there's a lot of diverse CSOs participating in this coalition, and then they bring different knowledge, experiences, and then GTC facilitates in that, and there's a lot of exchange learning as well, and how we can strengthen that learning from each different region and make a collective global movement in addressing trade.
The Gender and Trade Coalition is so important because working in the space can often feel quite isolating, but when we come together in a coalition, we see that not only are our struggles common and shared struggles, but our solidarities are also shared solidarities. And in a collective manner, we can effectively resist the corporate capture of our economic futures and ensure fairer economic rights and distribution for all.
The value of the Gender and Trade Coalition is actually quite timely because they actually are at the forefront of making sure that women and girls' needs are reflected in trade policy.
The value of the Gender and Trade Coalition for me is really about bringing together feminist organizations, like-minded groups, as well as allies who are working in a new trade system that is divisive, sometimes both geographically, sometimes through countries, and then sometimes through issues as well as thematic areas because of just how broad, expensive, and multiplied trade has become. And I think Gender and Trade Coalition is really special in that way. We bring all those groups together in one space to talk about the issues, to work together, to strategize, to advocate, and to think about a different kind of trade system that we can live in.
The Gender and Trade Coalition, I'd say the first value is, of course, the consolidation of voices, of groups, of women advocates who normally would be left out of trade policymaking or trade decision from micro to macro levels. So groups such as the Gender and Trade Coalition is very, very important for helping at the nitty-gritty level of understanding what the policy issues and questions are, pooling our understanding, bringing, as we're doing here, pooling our understanding, shaking out the tree leaves of the different minutiae of the technicalities, and coming together with positions that we can advocate for our governments to help our governments make better decisions and make better policy making. So I think the consolidation of research, the practice, learning from each other, those who are working with people on the ground, those who are in academia, it brings that space where we can all sit together one-to-one and learn and share with each other and then go out into the world to make the changes that we need to.
I think solidarity is the important thing, yeah, and how to bring the decolonial feminism perspective on our works.
We know that, after years, when civil society organizations, women's rights organizations had been pointing out that there are gender impacts of especially the trade agreements that our governments are signing globally, but it was not taken seriously. But now we see globally that there is a kind of a shift in that discussion, and the WTO is taking it up. So gender and trade is back in fashion, but the problem is, I think, the framing of it or the approach are raising major concerns. And this is the point when women's rights groups and their allies have to come together to actually kind of voice their opinion, their critical analysis, because I think the way these approaches are in a way being manipulated to advance economic interests of corporations who are based in the global north. So therefore, a global south-led women's rights organization-led coalition, which has a more or less like consolidated position and very important positions, which is based both on technical analysis but also learning from the ground, because the Gender and Trade Coalition members are connected to grassroots movements, campaigns, and realities. And that experience and knowledge and that coming together, I think, is very, very important at this time, at this particular time in the trade and gender debate.
The value of the Gender and Trade Coalition is that it's a political space where feminists working on trade justice can come together and strengthen their own analysis, strengthen one another's analysis, and be in solidarity with one another and learn from all of our plurality.